All right, so in this video, we're going to use what we learned with unit rate, combine it with what we learned about solving proportions to find a missing value. Okay? So we're going to say that I can use unit rate and proportions to find missing values. Okay. So when we were doing proportions, some of you guys were doing it in your head by using unit rate, which is totally fine. I just want you to be able to use both so that you can kind of switch between them, because sometimes unit rate makes more sense, sometimes proportions makes more sense. So how we're going to apply this and practice switching between the two are called ratio tables. And ratio table is just a table, so like one of these, that contains equivalent ratios. And remember that equivalent just means they're describing the same relationship. So like here, it's always going to be however many trees is going to make some number of apples, right? So each of these ratios describes that number of trees with that number of apples. Okay? So let's start with this example. So here I can see that there's 1 tree, there's 2 trees, there's 3 trees, and it goes on. Okay? And then for 1 tree, there's 17 apples. For 2 trees, there's 34 apples. And I want to find how many apples for 3 and 5 trees, assuming that it's going to have a constant rate. Okay? So what is the ratio of the number of apples to the number of trees? So I'm going to take the number of apples, 7, let's do 34, and compare it to the number of trees. So these two go together. So 34 to 2. Okay? Then I want to find the unit rate. How many apples per tree? So I'm going to take the number of apples, 34, divide it by 2. 34 divided by 2 is 17. So you get 17 apples per tree. Okay? So I just took a ratio from the table, okay? And then I found the unit rate from that ratio. So now I'm going to use that with proportions to fill in the rest of the ratio table, okay? Knowing that they're all going to have this unit rate. Okay, so I need to make sure that I always align apples to trees. Okay, so I'm going to take my initial ratio, my unit rate. Okay, there's 17 apples for 1 tree. And I want to know how many apples for 3 trees. So since I don't know the number of apples, I'm going to put my variable there to 3 trees. Okay, and then I know how to do this by solving proportions. So I'm going to make them into fractions. 17 over 1 equals a over 3. Then we're going to cross multiply. 17 times 3 equals 1 times a. $17 times 3 is 51. 1 times a is just a. And we were looking for the number of apples. So 51 would go up here, because for every 3 trees, it makes 51 apples. Okay. Right. So you can do it that way. You can also see like that this way, to get from 1 to 17, I'm multiplying by 17. 2 times 17 is 34. 3 times 17 is 51. So I could do times 17 to get that box. okay? And I know it's a lot, okay? So I just want you to pick one way that works for you, okay? Some of you might see the multiplying way. Some of you might need to do it this way. A lot of times I have to do it the proportions way. That's totally fine, okay? So let's practice with the proportions again. So I'm going to take the ratio, my unit rate, make 17 apples for one tree. I want to know how many apples. I don't know, so I put my variable there for 5 trees. Okay, and then I set them up as fractions. 17 over 1 equals A over 5. I'm going to cross multiply 17 times 5, which is what you're doing up here anyway, right? If I just say this times 17, then 1 times A. 17 times 5 is 85. 1 times A is A. So 85 apples. So 85 would go here. So if you do it with the unit rate and setting up a proportion, if you don't see how to multiply, that's what's happening. Okay? So there's like 1,000 different ways to do ratio tables. So as long as they end up having the same unit rate, it's fine, whatever way works for you. All right, so here I have minutes in this row and miles traveled in this row. And I want to know, what is the ratio of number of minutes to the number of miles traveled? Well, the only point where that works is right here. This is the only spot where it has both minutes and miles filled in. Okay, so I'm going to take the number of minutes, because it asked for that first, 23, compared to the number of miles, 2. Okay, then I'm going to find the unit rate in minutes per mile. So I'm going to take that number of minutes, 23, and divide it by the number of miles, 2. 23 divided by 2 is 11.5. So it's 11.5 minutes for every 1 mile. Maybe you're running, jogging, I don't know. All right. So I can either use unit rate or solving proportions to fill in the rest of the table. Okay, so I'm going to show you both ways. It's going to make this video a bit longer, but that's okay. All right, so to go from the top row to the bottom row using 11.5, it's getting smaller, so I'm going to divide. So to go from the top row to the bottom row, going that same direction, the arrow's going the same way, I need to do the same thing. Divide by 11.5. Right, because 23 divided by 11.5 is 2. So if I'm going the same way from 34.5 to this box, I need to do the same thing and divide. Okay, so 34.5 divided by 11.5 is 3. Okay. If I wanted to go the opposite direction, okay, I need to do the opposite operation. So if we're going top to bottom was dividing, going bottom from top should be multiplying. So I'm going to take 5 times 11.5 is 57.5. Okay, and then 1 times 11.5, because I'm going from bottom to top, is just going to be 11.5. Or we could have gotten that from our unit rate. For 1 mile traveled, it's 11.5 minutes. Okay? So sometimes it might make more sense to you to use the unit rate with proportions. Okay? Or if you find the unit rate and you figure out, okay, it's getting smaller, I should be dividing, or it's getting larger, I should be multiplying. If you go one way, like if I went from top to bottom by dividing, to go the other way, I'm going to do the opposite thing and multiply, okay? And I'll show you with proportions again real quick. So I have, my unit rate is minutes to miles, okay? So if I have 11.5 minutes for every 1 mile, okay, here I didn't know the number of miles, so my variable would go there. But I did know that it was 34.5. So I'm just redoing the problem a different way, okay? So I'm going to set them up as fractions. 11.5 over 1 is 34.5 over m. Then we're going to cross multiply. 11.5 times m is 34.5 times 1. Let me zoom in a bit. Yeah. Okay, so 11.5 times m is 11.5 m. 34.5 times 1 is 34.5. To solve for m, I'm going to divide by 11.5. Okay, and 34.5 divided by 11.5 is 3. So, I can use a proportion and get the same answer, okay? So, sometimes I see the multiplying and dividing way, sometimes I don't. And that's okay, whichever one applies to you. All right, and then I'm going to show you how to do this side again with the proportion. Again, I'm just doing the same problem. We should get the same answer. Just showing you a different way to do it. So whichever way makes more sense to you. Okay, so I have my ratio of minutes to miles. My unit rate is 17 minutes per mile. Nope, sorry, that was apples. 11.5 minutes per mile. Okay. It gives me the number of miles, so that's going to go here. 5 goes there, but I don't know the number of minutes. So I'm going to put a variable in the spot that I don't know that number. Okay. Then I'm going to write them as fractions. 11.5 over 1 equals m over 5. I'm going to cross multiply. 11.5 times 5 equals 1 times m. 11.5 times 5 is 57.5. 1 times m is m. Okay? So, if you don't immediately see what you're multiplying or dividing by, that's okay. Find your unit rate and use that to set up a proportion and solve that proportion. Okay? All right, so it might be a bit of a jump for you to do the fractions and decimals, but I believe in you, okay? So, whichever method makes most sense to you, I want you to find the missing spots and fill the missing spots in for your practice.